The smartphone in your pocket is dying. Not because it's old, not because the technology is outdated, because somebody gets paid when it breaks. Every single year, millions of people hand over $1,000 for a new device, fully aware of the countdown timer ticking inside it. The battery dies before dinner. Apps stutter. The operating system freezes. And within 3 short years, we walk right back to the store to buy a replacement. We accept this as an unalterable law of nature, but apply that same standard to any other product, and the illusion falls apart. Imagine a multi-million-dollar highway bridge collapsing into a river exactly 3 years after construction. There would be criminal investigations, executives in handcuffs. Yet when hyper-advanced technology breaks on a tight corporate schedule, we don't call the police. We call it normal. The smartphone in your pocket contains more raw computing power than the computers that sent astronauts to the moon. And somehow it has a shorter functional lifespan than a toaster from 1950. The standard defense is that technology moves fast, that phones become obsolete because innovation outpaces old hardware, and nobody is forcing you to upgrade. That argument sounds reasonable. It doesn't survive contact with the evidence. This is not a technological limitation. It is a calculated business strategy. And the people responsible literally wrote it down. There is a documented paper trail stretching back over a century. To understand why your phone dies on schedule, we have to travel back to a smoke-filled room in Geneva, Switzerland. The year is 1924. A group of wealthy executives representing the largest light bulb manufacturers on Earth, General Electric, Osram, Philips, gathered around a massive wooden table. The men in that room weren't building smartphones. Smartphones didn't exist, but they were writing the economic logic that would eventually run on every device in your pocket. Their problem wasn't making a reliable product, it was that they had become too good at it. Engineers at the time were creating filaments that lasted up to 4,000 hours. To see what that engineering looked like, you only have to find a small fire station in Livermore, California. Hanging from the ceiling is a hand-blown bulb known as the Centennial Light. Installed in 1901, before airplanes, before radio, before the First World War. That bulb is still glowing today. It has outlasted every company that ever tried to replicate it. The executives in 1924 looked at that bulb and saw a disaster. They had discovered a terrifying contradiction inside industrial capitalism. What happens when everyone already owns your product? If a light bulb lasts forever, consumers only buy one. The market saturates. And in a system built on perpetual quarterly growth, saturation is a death sentence. A product that never needs replacing is not an engineering achievement. It is a corporate catastrophe. So they formed a secret alliance called the Phoebus Cartel, and their first order of business was to deliberately make their own products worse. The cartel capped the maximum lifespan of a light bulb at exactly 1,000 hours. No more, no less. If a factory manager found a way to make a filament that lasted longer, he wasn't promoted. He was fined. Inspectors tested bulbs coming off production lines, and any factory exceeding the limit faced crushing financial penalties. Within a few years, the average bulb lifespan dropped by more than half. Sales skyrocketed. The cartel had manufactured scarcity out of pure abundance. The Phoebus documents were later uncovered by historians. The intent was explicit. The strategy worked exactly as designed. The philosophy spread. In 1932, a New York broker named Bernard London wrote a pamphlet titled Ending the Depression Through Planned Obsolescence, proposing that governments place mandatory legal expiration dates on every consumer good. When the date arrived, the item would be classified as dead, and you would be legally required to destroy it and buy a replacement. Refuse, and you'd be treated as a criminal. London's proposal never passed. But corporations realized they didn't need the government to force people to destroy their possessions. They just had to make people feel embarrassed to own them. General Motors turned embarrassment into a science. Every year through the 1950s, GM's chief designer Harley Earl released the same car with slightly new tail fins and fresh paint, running campaigns to make last year's model look hopelessly dated. Millions traded in working vehicles, not because the machine was broken, but because their social standing felt like it was. Some call this consumer vanity. But when corporations control the cultural signals of status and run billion-dollar advertising machines, individual choice operates inside a system engineered to produce a specific outcome. The choice was real. The environment that shaped it was manufactured. Eventually, people caught on. They kept their cars longer, fixed appliances instead of replacing them, ignored the annual refresh. So planned obsolescence adapted. It crawled off the surface of the product and hid somewhere far more difficult to fight. It disappeared inside the machine itself. Think back to phones from 20 years ago. The Nokia bricks, the Motorola flip phones. If the battery died, you slid off the back cover, bought a $10 replacement, snapped it in, and the phone lived another 3 years. Then the industry changed the rules. One by one, manufacturers glued glass backs permanently onto metal frames and called it minimalism, premium, water resistance. The defense was that sealed designs enabled thinner profiles and better waterproofing. Some of that is true, but every one of those engineering goals could have been achieved while still allowing battery access. Waterproof phones with removable batteries have been manufactured and sold. The choice to seal the battery permanently was not a technical inevitability. It was a decision, and the financial consequences flow entirely in one direction. Lithium-ion chemistry guarantees that after roughly 500 charge cycles, battery capacity drops so significantly the device becomes unreliable. By sealing that battery inside a glass and aluminum cage requiring professional heat guns to open, the corporate answer to a dying battery shifted completely. You don't buy a part. You buy a whole new phone. Kyle Wiens has been repairing electronics since he was a teenager. In 2003, when his iBooks logic board failed and Apple refused to publish the repair manual, he reverse-engineered the repair himself and put the instructions online for free. That website became iFixit, today the largest free repair manual library on Earth, with millions of guides covering tens of thousands of devices. Wiens has testified before legislatures and documented in forensic detail what happened to the repair industry as phones became sealed systems. Independent repair shops that once fixed any device for $40 watched their work systematically disappear, not because customers stopped breaking phones, but because the phones were redesigned to be unrepairable. Parts were restricted to authorized dealers. Diagnostic software was locked behind corporate licensing agreements. Screws were replaced with proprietary formats that required tools only the manufacturer sold. Wiens described it plainly in testimony. The goal was not to make better products. The goal was to make repair impossible and replacement inevitable. But hardware is only half the battle. The ultimate weapon lies in the software. Imagine a laptop in perfect physical condition, scratch-free chassis, bright display, circuits working exactly as designed. You click accept on a routine update. Within months, the fans roar constantly, the machine heats up under basic tasks, and a message appears. Your hardware is no longer supported. Nothing broke. The software simply moved the goalposts. A digital eviction notice delivered silently over the air to render functional hardware obsolete on a corporate timeline. In 2017, this was dragged into the open. Apple was caught deliberately slowing down older iPhones through software updates without telling a single customer. When researchers at Primate Labs published benchmark data proving the performance drops, Apple couldn't deny it. Their explanation: they were throttling processors to protect aging batteries from unexpected shutdowns. It's worth following that logic to its conclusion. If Apple genuinely wanted to protect users from battery-related shutdowns, the obvious solution was to notify users and offer a battery replacement. Apple had that option. Instead, they silently degraded performance across millions of devices in a way indistinguishable to the average user from the phone simply being too old. The outcome, users buying new phones, was not a side effect. It was the most predictable result of the decision they made. Apple paid hundreds of millions in fines across multiple countries. Compared to the tens of billions generated by accelerating the upgrade cycle, those fines were a rounding error already priced into the strategy. Then came the final evolution. Breaking products was profitable. Making repair difficult was more profitable. But the most profitable move was making ownership itself disappear. BMW tried to charge $15 a month to activate heated seats already physically wired into the car in the customer's driveway. Digital platforms quietly deleted games, movies, and books from libraries customers had already paid full price for, because a licensing contract expired in a server room they would never see. And then there is John Deere. In 2015, Deere filed a legal argument with the U.S. Copyright Office that stopped many people cold. The company argued that farmers did not own their tractors. They had purchased a license to operate them. The actual software controlling the machine remained Deere's intellectual property, which meant that when something went wrong, only Deere's authorized technicians were permitted to fix it. Farmers across the Midwest documented what this meant in practice. A combine harvester breaks down during harvest, the narrow window between a dry spell and incoming rain, when every hour matters, and a delayed repair can cost an entire season's income. The fault is a single sensor. Any mechanic could replace it in under an hour. But Deere's software locks the machine completely until an authorized dealer runs a diagnostic. The nearest dealer is hours away. The wait is days. By the time the machine runs again, the weather has closed the window. The harvest is lost. Deere sends a service bill. Farmers drove to their state capitals and testified before legislative committees. They brought their broken machines as evidence. They explained, in plain language, that they had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for equipment they were no longer permitted to fix. Deere sent lobbyists to testify against every right to repair bill introduced in every state where farmers tried to pass one. Tech corporations spent millions lobbying to make it effectively illegal for independent repair shops to fix a cracked screen or swap a broken charging port, not because independent repair was dangerous, but because it was competition. We didn't just stop owning our technology. We started renting permission to use it. And then there is the cost that never appears on the receipt. Every discarded phone contains cobalt mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where children as young as 6 work in open pits for $1 a day. It contains rare earth minerals processed so chemically intensively that extraction zones in Inner Mongolia have produced lakes of radioactive black sludge visible from satellite. All of that to produce a device engineered from the moment of its design to last approximately 24 months. The world generates over 60 million metric tons of electronic waste every year. Less than 20% is formally recycled. The rest is burned in open fires in Ghana and Nigeria, the toxic smoke settling into the lungs of people nearby, or buried in landfills leaching lead, mercury, and cadmium into groundwater. The true cost of the upgrade cycle is not printed on the box. It is paid by people who will never own a smartphone at all. It looks like collective madness, till you understand what the system is optimizing for. Not longevity, not efficiency, not the rational use of finite resources, just the speed of the next transaction. Every market eventually saturates. When a system structurally required to generate infinite quarterly growth hits that wall, it faces one choice: find a new planet of customers, or force existing ones to keep buying the same things forever. Planned obsolescence is not a design flaw. It is not short-sighted greed. It is a load-bearing structural mechanism keeping the market from collapsing under the weight of its own success. It is what infinite growth looks like on a finite planet. The executives in Geneva in 1924 figured out how to keep selling products to people who already owned them, how to make abundance feel like scarcity, how to turn a finished sale into a permanent subscription. A century later, we are still living inside the system they designed. But the system has a vulnerability it never anticipated. It left a paper trail. The Phoebus cartel's documents are in archives. Apple's internal throttling decisions were reconstructed from benchmark data and court filings. John Deere's lobbying expenditures are public record. The strategy only works when it remains invisible, when each individual feels alone in a personal experience of frustration and replacement, never quite connecting the dead battery to the sealed casing, to the software update, to the $100 repair that was made deliberately impossible. The right to repair movement is what happens when enough people make that connection at the same time. In the last 5 years, it has passed into law in the European Union, requiring manufacturers to provide spare parts and repair manuals for consumer electronics for up to 10 years after a product's release. It has passed in multiple US states. Apple, the same company that spent years making independent repair illegal, now sells official spare parts and publishes repair manuals, not because its values changed, but because the legal and reputational pressure finally outweighed the financial benefit of keeping repair impossible. That is not a small thing. That is proof the system responds to organized resistance. The Centennial light bulb in Livermore, California is still burning. It has been on for over 120 years. It works because someone built it to work, and no one has yet found a financial reason to turn it off. That bulb is not a relic. It is a demonstration of what is possible when the goal is durability, rather than replacement. It is evidence that the short lifespan of your phone is not a law of physics. It is a policy. And policies can be changed by the people who refuse to accept them as anything else. Your phone isn't dying because the technology failed. It's dying because the economy requires it to. The question is whether we keep accepting that as a law of nature, or start treating it as a choice.